All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lee Frame. I am the Associate Director of the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center here at GW. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about something that I'm quite passionate about, both nutrition and the gut. And for Mental Health Month, we're really focusing on how can these two aspects help you have a happier, healthier life. And hopefully we're going to give you some tips and tricks. Just an outline for today, we're going to do a quick talk, maybe about 30 minutes with some foundational information. And then we're going to open it up for question and answer, as well as some discussion, which I think you all will find very helpful because I know this is a topic people will have a lot of questions about. I also wanted to put a quick shout out for the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center itself. If you are not aware, we offer services to individuals, including information about how to improve your nutrition, how to get more movement in your day, how to do maybe a mindfulness meditation practice or integrating yoga, or if you're having stress management problems or really kind of you name it, and the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center can do it. So we are here for you. And if you go to our website, which is just rwc.smhs.gwu.edu, or you can find us on the main page under wellness, and you can fill out a consult request form, and we will get back to you within 24 to 72 business hours. And we can typically book an appointment in the same week. So if you are looking for any assistance, or if you just need someone to talk to, that is the place to go. Also, there are a lot of resources on our webpage that you might find useful, information about stress management, anxiety, different things like that. So I would suggest checking that out as well. So I just want to get us all centered and ready to learn and discuss. So to do that, I want us to do 3 shared breaths. So if you'll start by exhaling fully, and then inhale and let it go out of your mouth or out of your nose, whatever feels comfortable. And then repeat. And one last time. All right, letting go of that stress of wherever we came from so we can focus on this. Screen going here. All right, so first, just a quick overview of whole health in case you haven't come to one of our events and don't know anything about it. We use the whole health approach, which centers on the idea of purpose. So your meaning in life, what you're striving to do, and everything around it helps support that purpose. And that it comes in the form of self-care, clinical care, as well as your community. And today we're going to zoom in on one. We're going to talk about nutrition to support your purpose. Another really important topic is recharge, and it's actually related to this nutrition topic that we're talking about today. So if you don't have stress in your life, I'm not really sure you're alive, right? Like this is part of life. We all have stress. It really is unavoidable, but it's how we deal with that stress that matters. And that's where the recharge element of the whole health wheel comes in. And we're not going to talk much about that today, but if you want to learn more, you can reach out to us and schedule an individual consult. But what is important is that people who are experiencing chronic stress, like many of us, it actually affects our mood. It's been linked to depressive-like symptoms, and there's actually a biological mechanism here, which I've laid out here for those of you who are really interested in the science, and there's a citation, but it's something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or just BDNF for short. So when you're chronically stressed, your BDNF goes down, and it leads to these depressive-like symptoms. So whether you have depression or not, it's going to exacerbate any symptoms that you may be experiencing. So how do we recharge from chronic stress? Well, one way is by increasing BDNF. And you can increase BDNF with regular physical activity and exercise, preferably some natural movement throughout the day. And that actually reduces stress and reduces your depressive-like symptoms. That's great. But today we're talking about nutrition, right? So how does nutrition play into this? Well, phytonutrients. Phytonutrients are plant chemicals. Many of them actually give plants their colors. So you'll see there are red foods, orange, all these different colors of food, and they're colored often either from the nutrients like beta carotene or phytonutrients, like for instance, polyphenols in grapes. That's one most people have heard of. Well, these phytonutrients have been shown to increase BDNF, particularly turmeric and curcumin. So you may have heard of golden milk, or people are making these golden teas now with turmeric because of all the health benefits. Well, some of those health benefits are derived by increasing BDNF. What else we need to know about gut diet? So we're talking about the gut and nutrition and how do they interact. So when we're talking about the gut microbiota, diet is actually more important than genetics. How much more? About 5 times more important than genetics. Now that number is an estimate, but still it puts in perspective how important diet is when we're talking about the gut microbiota and gut health. Now, in terms of diet, how does it affect the gut microbiome? So if you have a regularly healthy diet, you have a certain gut microbiome, and you go away, you're on vacation or you're at a conference and you aren't eating your regular diet, maybe it's not as healthy. Your gut microbiome is going to change. But the good news is when you come back and go back to that regular healthy diet, it will come back. So it's fairly resilient and robust. It will bounce back. But then there's something called long-term dietary changes, right? So short-term is like a little blip, and long-term is in the order of 6 months or more, probably around a year. And so if we do that, say you haven't been eating very well, you've been very stressed, you really haven't been taking care of yourself, and your microbiome isn't looking so great. It's not quite as diverse. It's not so healthy. And you've improved your diet, and you do that for at least 6 months, that improvement in your gut microbiome is now a semi-permanent change. It will stay that way as long as there aren't any really large perturbations, like you go back to having this type of diet and then it will revert back. But it does want to stay in this new state. So the good thing is, if you can make dietary changes, you can make a long-term change to the composition of your gut microbiota. Now, why do we care? Why do we care about gut microbiota at all? Well, let's talk about what a marker of health with the microbiome is. When we talk about the microbiome, there's lots of information and it's kind of overwhelming. But right now, the most important marker seems to be diversity. So a more diverse microbiome seems to be a healthier microbiome, or at least as close as we can say to a healthier gut microbiome. So how do you get a more diverse microbiome? You do it with a more diverse diet. Now, in general, we think of more diverse diets, of more variety, as being healthier. So this is great. This is reinforcing what we know about nutrition. And here's my little schematic. So let's say you have maybe a not so healthy diet. Your microbiome is not that diverse, but maybe you don't give up on all those things that you really enjoy, but you're just adding in things that are kind of crowding them out. So you're having more healthy foods than you would have otherwise. Well, that's going to improve your gut microbiome because you're having a diverse diet. So I think this is a great example of where you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to do everything exactly right. As long as you're having a variety of different foods, your gut microbiome is probably going to be pretty healthy. Now, why else are we talking about the gut microbiome with brain health, with mental health and mood? How do they interact? Well, this one's may actually blow your mind. People don't really understand how closely connected the gut and the brain are. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but just to illustrate it for you, thinking about something that makes you nervous, perhaps public speaking makes you nervous and you get butterflies in your stomach, or maybe you even get actually sick. Well, that's the gut-brain connection right there. That is the microbiota gut-brain axis in action. And so hopefully you can understand intuitively that there's a direct connection. But here's the science behind it. First, there's a direct line of information coming through the vagus nerve. So this vagus nerve goes from the brain to a whole bunch of different intestines and the stomach, and it's providing information, and it's actually bidirectional. So that's the part that maybe is a little surprising. So the brain is communicating with the gut, but the gut is also communicating with the brain. Now, what else is going on there? There are also neurotransmitters that are secreted. So there are all sorts of things going on here in the gut. The gut microbiome is affecting the local gut here. It's affecting the immune system, whether it's inflammatory or not. It's secreting things like short-chain fatty acids that are important for the gut health and also for brain health. And it also actually secretes neurotransmitters, which that maybe is a little bit crazy, right? What neurotransmitters in the gut? Actually, a large amount of neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, and they're really important in that crosstalk. So when we're talking about mental health, mood, all of those things, we have to also think about the gut. We want to support the brain, but we also have to think about the gut, or we're not really supporting the whole body. So going back to stress and how does the microbiome gut gut-brain axis interact with stress. So this has actually been widely studied, and it's very clear that stress alters the gut microbiome ecosystem. And I really want to point out the point that I'm saying ecosystem there, because it's about balance. It's about having all the right elements and having them interact with each other. And it's not as easy as perhaps just we'd like it to be, where we just take a pill. Oh, you're missing this bug. We'll just take this probiotic and that's going to fix it. If the ecosystem is still broken, that may not fix it. So how does stress throw off the gut microbiome ecosystem? Well, in a mouse model, they did 2 hours of social stress, and it actually changed the gut microbiome. And it changed it in a way that is replicating findings of longer exposure times in humans. So this is really exciting, because a lot of the microbiome work in animal models don't always translate to humans. But here we see that it's the same effect as we see in humans. So we know social stress alters the gut microbiome. Another example of prenatal stress. So looking at pregnant women, looking at their salivary cortisol, as well as just their self-reports saying how stressed they are. It's been linked to changes in the infant microbiome, so their offspring. And in those microbiomes that were altered, they were found to have more GI symptoms and more allergies. So this is a change in the microbiome, which is leading to negative health outcomes. But the good thing is, we talked about what's the most important thing with the microbiome is nutrition, and that's alterable. So that's something we can actually take control of. We'll talk more about that. But first, let's talk a little bit about what else can go wrong with stress and then, with stress and the microbiome gut axis. You can have a loss of barrier function. So what is this? This is, the gut is actually not performing its full function because it is leaky. The term leaky gut is not very popular, but it's really the best way to describe it. It's the tight junctions are not quite as tight. And what happens is things are kind of going willy-nilly back and forth across the gut barrier without being properly screened. And so lots of things are going to contribute to that. But one of the major things is a diminished mucosal layer. So the mucosa actually, it decreases. And what that does is it opens up the gut to being attacked by pathogens, for instance, H. pylori. And this is where the ulcer H. pylori stress link exists. While stress does not necessarily cause ulcers, it doesn't directly cause them, it indirectly can open you up to having ulcers, because it makes you more easy for the H. pylori to get in, because that mucosa is not there to protect you. And because it's also not there to protect you, you have a pro-inflammatory response. And inflammation is very strongly linked to a lot of health outcomes, including mood, depressive symptoms, things like that. So we don't want to have rampant inflammation. What's really interesting is in mouse models, antidepressants are able to undo all this damage. So perhaps some of the effect of antidepressants is actually working on the gut themselves, in addition to the effect on the brain. Going back to BDNF. So we talked about that. We talked about the microbiome. We talked about the gut, talked about the brain. How does this all fit together? So, and how does nutrition play in? Because that's what we're talking about, right? So nutrition, as well as exercise, has an effect on the microbiome. And what does it do? It increases diversity, makes them happier. The right players are there. It increases short chain fatty acid production, which is actually the fuel for the gut itself. So it prevents leaky gut. And that affects the brain. And how does it do that? Well, it does it through BDNF. So here we are going back to, this is the mechanism behind it. So an increased BDNF from a healthier, more diverse microbiome. So if we can do all of these things and kind of start pushing the BDNF in the right direction, we're really going to have a very large effect. And you can see decrease in depression-like symptoms, decrease in anxiety. All of those things are fantastic, and we can do them ourselves. But just a little bit more on this, just to drive home the point further. Here is a quote from an abstract from a journal article. The gut microbiota links dietary polyphenols with management of psychiatric mood disorders. The pathophysiology of depression is multifactorial, yet generally aggravated by stress and its associated physiological consequences. To effectively treat these diverse risk factors, a broad-acting strategy is required. And it's been suggested that the gut-brain axis signaling may play a pinnacle role in promoting resilience. There's the keyword, resilience. That's what we're trying to do here. So we're going to promote resilience through the gut-brain axis. And it does this to several of these stress-induced changes, including pathogenic load, inflammation, HPA axis activation, oxidative stress, and neurotransmitter imbalances. The gut microbiota also manages the bioaccessibility of phenolic metabolites from dietary polyphenols. What does that mean? That is those phytonutrients I was talking about. So if you eat a healthy diet and you don't have a gut microbiome, which is impossible, but if you didn't have a gut microbiome, you wouldn't get the health benefits because they are pretty much metabolizing the vast majority of those polyphenols. And so you want to get the phytonutrients to the gut microbiome so they can metabolize them and you can have the health benefits. And in this article, they go over one of the known therapeutic benefits, which is an efficacy against depression. So having a diet rich in polyphenols can reduce symptoms of depression. And here's a little bit more on the metabolism in case you're questioning that there's no science behind this. It is absolutely there, and BDNF is a big player. So that's why we're focusing in on what we're focusing in on. But there's also some research that's really interesting that's showing that perhaps probiotics may help. But I wanted to just touch on this just so you can understand the role of the microbiome a little bit further. There are a few examples here. So Lactobacillus reuteri has been shown to increase oxytocin, which acts on the vagus nerve, and it increases social behavior. Wow. Okay, so you take a probiotic and you become more social. That's kind of crazy. But if you now understand this gut-brain axis, maybe it doesn't seem quite so crazy. Similarly, Lactobacillus rhamnosus increases GABA, again, through the vagus nerve. It decreases stress responsiveness, so you're not as hyperreactive to stress, and decreases anxiety and depressive-like behavior. That's incredible. Incredible. Now, Bifidobacterium longum and the specific strain, B. longum is a great species, be an important one. But here it is again, BDNF, right? So this one is specifically acting on BDNF and showing that decrease in anxiety-like and depressive-like symptoms. So the only other thing I want to point out here was these guys down here, these short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria. So short-chain fatty acids come from a diet that is high in microbiota accessible carbohydrates. That's a fancy term that basically means fiber and resistant starch. So if you have a diet that is high in fiber and resistant starch, which is what all these guys eat, then they will produce short chain fatty acids. And those short chain fatty acids will fuel your gut so it won't become leaky, but they also fuel your brain. They actually travel to your brain and can quelch neuroinflammation. And there's some indication that this could actually have a health benefit by decreasing the stress responsiveness and decreasing anxiety and depressive-like symptoms. Okay, now we're going to get to the how-to. So that's the why. This is why we care. Now, the nutrition how-to. First, this is one of my favorite tools for nutrition, and I think it makes it very feasible and hopefully not overwhelming because nutrition does not have to be difficult. And I know a lot of people try and make it fancy. You have to know you have to have like 35% of this macronutrient, and you have to hit, you have to be in ketosis. You don't really need to do any of that. You need to follow this plan. And this is in general, right? So ideally, every meal would look like this, but some meals are going to be a little bit different. And so as long as you're generally eating this way, this is what I'd like to see. And you'll see that the vast majority of your plate is plants. So this is what we call a plant-based diet. A plant-based diet is one majority of the calories are coming from plants. And there's lots of ways to do that. You could be a vegan or a vegetarian. You could be a flexitarian, which is someone who sometimes eats meat, sometimes doesn't. You could be a pescatarian who only eats seafood, or you could be an omnivore who just eats a lot of plants. So there's lots of different ways to do this. And then also, don't be afraid of oil. We had this big fad in the 90s, right? Low fat everything. That wasn't healthy for us. And I'll tell you one reason it's not healthy for you. The majority of your brain is fat. So if you don't eat fat in your diet, you're going to have problems with mental health. And so you need to make sure you're getting some healthy fat in your diet, preferably from whole sources. Like avocados are a great source, but olive oil has always been shown to be a really healthy one. And then in terms of beverages, we want you to be drinking water primarily. Water is the best source of hydration, and it's also calorie free, right? So you aren't getting any added calories that aren't really adding anything to your diet in terms of benefit. Now, the caveat with that would be tea or coffee are actually quite beneficial, especially if you don't add anything to them, right? So if you don't put sugar in them or you're not adding cream to them, then they're extremely healthy. And then what you add to them, if you do it in small amounts, may not be so okay. So how do we do this? We're going to keep it plant-based. That means at least 51% of your diet is coming from plants. But you also need to keep it minimally processed. Ultra processed foods have been shown to actually increase caloric intake. So they essentially make you eat more because you don't feel as full. And that's not what we want. They also often don't have as many nutrients in them because they've been processed. Or if they've been processed, sometimes they add the nutrients back afterwards, but it doesn't have the same effect on your body. So an example would be corn. So ideally you want corn fresh on the cob. Maybe you cut it off, you're cooking it. That's a minimally processed food. A processed food is something that's coming pre-packaged. Not the end of the world, especially if this is the difference between you eating a vegetable or you not eating a vegetable. I would love to see you eat any vegetable. Canned foods often can be higher in sodium. You can rinse them and reduce the sodium. But the better pick actually would be a frozen vegetable because they are minimally processed, unless they're adding things to it like a sauce or something. But they typically have no sodium added. And the real great tip about that one is when something is frozen, it is picked and frozen right away. So it is the peak of freshness and the peak of nutrition, as opposed to something you buy at the store that isn't frozen. It had to travel on a truck for a few days and who knows, had been sitting there for a day or two. But the ones we really want to avoid are the ones over here, the ultra processed, right? So things that you can't make at home in your house, right? Doritos, things like that. We want to limit Cheetos. Those are things that, okay, maybe you don't have to not eat them ever, but they really shouldn't be a regular occurrence in your diet. Now, how do you do this? Because nutrition is expensive. Well, it doesn't have to be. And I think sometimes it's a bit of a perspective. If we have a convenient meal like pizza and soda, which no one would say is an expensive meal, right? This is not a luxury meal, but it's typically about $21 to have a 14-inch pizza and a 2-liter bottle of Coke, which is not going to feed you for that long. And for the same amount of money, you can go to the grocery store and get all of these items, which will feed you for probably a few days, right? You've got beans and rice. That's going to last for a long time. Oatmeal, all these fresh produce. So sometimes we have to think about our perspective and what is worth spending money on, because even if we're talking head to head, this looks like more food and more filling to me. I would rather have this food than that food. But we also want to have that food because it's got the rainbow in it. And eating the rainbow, as I already alluded to, it's a signal about the different phytonutrients. And here's a great graphic about the phytonutrients that are found in various different foods and their actions on cancer. So anti-cancer effects. So another reason to eat the color is anti-cancer. And then we talked about the diversity of diet and the diversity of the microbiome. Really important. And how do we do that? We want to aim for 30 different plants per week. Now that might sound crazy. That's a ton of plants, but it's not really that many when you think about it, right? If you're putting, a teaspoon of cinnamon in your oatmeal, well, now that's 2 plants, right? You've got the oats and you've got the cinnamon. If you're having tea, now there's a different plant. So these things can add up pretty quickly. But the key is really getting 30 different plants. So preferably from all these different colors, if you can. That's a good goal to have. And obviously, every day you aren't going to get all of them. And maybe not even every week you're going to get all of them. But hopefully over the course of a month, you're definitely hitting all of these colors on a regular basis and having different plants. But how does this really work in the real world, right? You don't have time to cook, you're busy. How does this work? Well, my biggest key is meal prepping. So this is actually a photo of one of our graduates doing a meal prep video where she is making a few different options for lunches. And she started with a base of quinoa, and then she has different vegetables and then some garbanzo beans that she's adding in to have variety. So you can do these in large batches and then have some variety within them for the week, and it's all done, right? You could do this in one day and then have all your lunches for the week be packed, or all your dinners, depending on how your life works. Another key is to keep healthy food and snacks handy. And this plays into the lunch piece too, right? So if you didn't have time to make your lunch and you come in and you have to figure out how to get lunch, your options are going to be a little bit more limited and perhaps not as healthy. So that planning ahead can be helpful. But I think maybe snacks are almost even more important because the snack options, often like a vending machine, are really not great healthy options. Maybe there's 1 or 2 in there. But if you had something on hand that you like and is healthy, like say dried fruit and nuts, then you have something with you at all times. And you don't have to wait until you're starving to eat something, which is a whole other point that we'll talk about. And another tip is to stay hydrated. Now, This is because you can actually mistake thirst for hunger. So if you're thirsty, sometimes it feels like hunger. So if you aren't hydrated, it's difficult to tell whether you're actually hungry or not. So that's my other big tip. And then down here, I have some resources for meal prepping recipes. All of these are either created by RDs or approved by registered dietitians. That's what an RD is. So they are healthy recipes that you can use with your meal prepping. Now, going back to that hydration issue, we're going to talk about listening to your body, intuitive eating. So if you are hungry, you should eat as long as you are hydrated, because then you know it's actual hunger, right? Listen to your body. Now, what's an example of someone who isn't doing intuitive eater? That's someone who maybe would call themselves a dieter. So the dieter doesn't eat the pizza at the office party, but they want to. Then they go home and overeat at dinner, trying and satisfying that craving. So they denied themselves, and then they had overeat because they were so hungry, and that didn't work out well. And that's the problem with dieting, is denying yourself really is not a good long-term solution. It's not even a good short-term solution. So what does an intuitive eater do? An intuitive eater wants a slice of pizza at the office party and eats it. Right? They did not deny themselves, but they had a small portion, right? They had one slice. They didn't eat a whole pizza or even a half a pizza. Then, because now they've had the pizza, they go home and have a light dinner because they're less hungry. So they actually ended up eating less, even though they ate the pizza. And that's why I want you to listen to your body. It has an innate wisdom that we often just ignore or frankly try and shove down because no, I'm on a diet. Don't do that. Work with your body, not against it. Similarly, if you're tired, there are multiple different ways to handle this. You might need a quick walk, take a stretch, or maybe just shake it out. Maybe you need to do a restorative meditation, have some quiet time, or sometimes a small snack can be actually quite helpful to give you that energy that you need. My tip for that would be to keep it under 200 calories if you can, or maybe around 200 calories, and to make sure that you have some protein in it for lasting energy. So I feel like I often use the example of dried fruit and nuts because it's something you can have with you no matter what. But like an apple and nuts, or maybe some cheese with some popcorn, just make sure whatever you're having has some protein in it to give you some lasting energy. So just to drive that home, the how-to for whole health is to listen to your body. And I'm not going to go into the description here, but that's really how you create whole health, is listening to your body and being tapped into it. And to do that, we use the Whole Health Institute's practice of pause, notice, and choose. And now what does this mean? So pause means stop, take a deep breath. Notice, what do you think, feel, and sense right now? Then choose what you will do next. Whereas often what we do is we just keep pushing through and we just keep choosing, right? We definitely don't take time to pause, but we often don't even take time to notice how we're thinking or feeling or what we're sensing. We just keep moving. And I think the world would be a lot better place if every once in a while we just took a deep breath and thought before we made decisions. So we'll try and implement this. And I've got a few examples here that you can listen to as practicing. And the one that I'm really going to recommend is the pause, notice, choose while eating. This can help with being a mindful eater. And people who are mindful eaters tend to eat fewer calories and actually enjoy their meals more. So we really encourage you to be mindful. And that does mean not multitasking, which sometimes can be hard, right? Sometimes you might have a call or a meeting during lunch. Okay, that's going to happen. But try and have lunch, even if it's just 5 minutes of sitting by yourself and really being present with your meal. It will help you have a better experience and hopefully not overeat. A great example of mindless eating is eating in front of the television. I mean, who hasn't sat in front of the television and just kept putting food in their mouth and didn't even realize, and then whatever they were eating was completely gone and they were shocked. This has happened to everyone. And it's very easy to do because you're being mindless. And when you're being mindful, you don't typically do that, right? You aren't going to eat a whole bag of potato chips and you're sitting there and being mindful. You're like, oh, that's really good. I enjoyed that. I'm full. Now I'm done. And I put it away. So that's why we need to be mindful. So now we're going to walk through the resiliency and well-being worksheet a little bit using that pause, notice, choose method. And as I pointed out, purpose is at the center of the whole health method. And what is purpose? It's really what makes you get up in the morning. So first, we're going to start by pausing and noticing. So pause. What matters to you right now? What matters to you right now? What matters to you in the long term? Now choose. What is your purpose? What makes you get up in the morning? And I'm going to head and ask people to share their purpose that they'd like in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute. This will help get us ready for the next step. So there's different ways to look at purpose. One of my purposes is I want to make the world a happier, healthier place. And that really does drive me in everything that I do. And I use that to benchmark decisions, right? Like if I'm given an opportunity, is this going to make the world a happier, healthier place? If it is, I will do it. If it isn't going to do that, then I decline it. And it makes it easier for making decisions, but it also really gives me that reason to get up in the morning, right? I'm going to make the world a happier, healthy place. But I have other purposes too, right? Like I am a wife. I am the mother of 3 fur children, 3 cats. So all of those things are important to me. And I get up in the morning to provide that sense of purpose and fill those roles. So if any of you have any ones you would like to share, please feel free to do so. Not, we can move on. Okay, so now that we know what our purpose is, then we can talk about the self-care prevention plan. And we do one for each one of the elements in the whole health wheel, but today we're just going to talk about nutrition. So with nutrition, let's pause and notice. How do you feel after your favorite meal? Your favorite meal. And you can put this in the chat too if you'd like to share. Next, what types of food make you feel good after you eat them? They make you feel good after you eat them. So maybe not as much during, but when you're done eating them, you feel good. Ooh, satisfied. That's a good way to feel. So after you eat foods and you feel good, those are your power foods. So you need to know what your power foods are. Ooh, broccoli rabe. That's a good one, Ashley. I do like broccoli rabe. She may have noticed from my examples, I really like nuts and fruit. An apple with peanut butter is just like pure heaven for me. And I feel so good after eating. I feel satisfied, but I feel light. I don't feel like I need to take a nap like after Thanksgiving, which is, fun, but maybe not how I want to feel all the time. Rainbow trout, dark chocolate. All right. So now that we know what our power foods are, let's choose. How will you ensure you have easy access to your power foods throughout the day? Now, that's something you can do a little bit of thinking about. And we are also going to work through an example. Fruit, graham cracker, and almond butter. That sounds delicious too. Chocolate doesn't make you feel good. Well, that's interesting. Then I would say avoid the chocolate. You want to feel good, right? Oh, I see. It makes you hungry. Yeah, that's another good point too. Some foods are quite satiating, right? Like my apple, right? Apples are so filling and you feel good for a long time after. But other foods like, candy, cake, things that are quite delicious and you enjoy eating them at one sitting, they don't fill you for very long, right? You're going to be hungry soon after. And so maybe that's not a great choice when you're trying to fuel yourself for the day. All right. So when we talk about setting goals, we want to have SMART goals. And you probably all know already, but just as a reiteration, so SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And if we want to set a SMART goal for nutrition, there's a few different ways we could attack this. And so I give a couple of examples here for you. So a week, something like making more than 50% of my daily intake plants Monday through Friday, including going meatless at lunch 2 days a week. And then I included some examples here just so I can keep myself accountable, right? I know these 2 days a week, I can at least look at these examples and I already have them ready to go. And I have a link here for some other great ideas if that's something you are interested in doing. But maybe that's not your thing. Maybe you want to set a monthly goal and to bring dried fruit and nuts, preferably unsweetened, because you don't want to have that added sugar if you can avoid it, with me for a snack at least 2+ days a week to reduce my intake of ultra processed foods. So this goal works really nicely because you know that if you don't bring a snack, you're going to have ultra processed foods because you're going to go to the vending machine. So if you're bringing in dried fruit and nuts at least 2 days a week, then you're reducing your intake of ultra processed foods. Another thing I want to point out is these all seem relatively feasible, right? These are not huge goals. And that's something a lot of people do wrong when they set goals. They try and I'm going to go cold turkey and I'm not going to eat any ultra processed foods. That's probably not realistic, right? That's probably not going to happen. What makes more sense is to set these smaller SMART goals, and then you can always have new goals, right? Like, I accomplished that one. And now instead of doing 2 days a week, I'm going to go all 5 days a week. I'm going to bring in a snack and not have ultra processed foods. But taking it stepwise is really going to be a much better process. So I'm just going to close this and start the discussion, but with a quick plug for the Integrative Medicine podcast, because we talk about topics like this all the time. So if you want to keep up with the latest, check us out wherever you get your podcasts. And then finally, the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center, here is information about our leadership and our contacts. And if you want to do an individual consult, like I was recommending, you go to our website right here and you complete the consultation request form. It's pretty much on every single page on our website, but it's right at the top and on the first page. So that's how you get in touch with us. And now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that way we can have a little discussion. I can see all your faces. So questions, concerns, thoughts, comments, I will take anything. You can go ahead and unmute if you'd like. Courtney, are you trying to speak? Because I can't hear you.
Oh,
now I can.
No, you can see my, sorry, the light is behind me. So the whole thing about eating a wide variety, if you have food sensitivities, any tips for working around that if you're not sure what they are?
Food sensitivities are really tough when you're trying to figure them out. I have went through that myself, so I completely understand. My recommendation would be to keep a food diary. So when you do eat something, you can have something to look back to, because the hardest part is often remembering what you ate and when you ate it. Particularly because a lot of times food sensitivities are not immediate, right? Like you don't eat something and immediately have like an allergic reaction. It is often delayed. So it may be what you had for dinner last night or even 2 nights ago. But if you could start to notice a pattern, right? Like, okay, every week that I've eaten this, I've had this symptom, then you can really narrow it down. And that would be something that you may want to work on with a registered dietitian. But there are also some apps that can be really helpful for that. And I will make sure that Janet gets that information to send out to everyone.
Yeah, I have the FODMAP app.
I'm not familiar with that one, but there is a food intolerance app.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Also, if anyone wants to share a goal that they would like to do in terms of nutrition, or maybe get some feedback on how to make it feasible, we could talk about that too. Everyone's quiet today. Are we tired? Oh,
Lee, I have a question. I want to ask about people that have a tendency to binge eat, and what are some strategies that you can recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many eating disorders are actually also linked to the gut. And they're linked to dysbiosis, lack of that mucosal layer. So really focusing on the times outside of the binge eating and making sure they're getting that diversity of plants to help rebuild the gut microbiome can actually prevent those relapses. But the other really important thing is to not starve yourself, right? Or letting yourself get so hungry because you were so busy and you forgot to eat. That's often a trigger for binge eating. So making sure that you are eating on it doesn't have to be a regular schedule. Like I don't like to make things that stringent, but don't wait till you're starving to eat, right? And then the other thing is often there are trigger foods. And so just being really aware of what trigger foods are and knowing your own trigger foods so that you can either avoid them when you're feeling like, oh, I might be in a vulnerable position, and have something else that you know will not be a trigger, but will still satisfy that hunger that you're feeling. And perhaps may actually be even more beneficial to you in the long term. Like something that's really high in fiber, it's going to help reinforce the healthy gut microbiome and make it easier to avoid those binges in the future.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll also take questions of the gut microbiome if anyone has questions about that.
Okay, I have another question. Because of a book I've been reading, what is it there in a position or a stance that you have about fecal implantation or whatever that's called?
Yes, there's a lot of different names for it. Actually, fecal material transplant is probably the most common one. And it's been shown in research studies to be effective for certain things, mainly C. diff, C. difficile. And that's a very specific use case. And it does seem to be quite beneficial, more beneficial than many drugs that are on the market. However, I think it's kind of becoming passe in that we are developing technologies that mean we will no longer have to do that. So there are pills that are coming into, well, they're already in phase 3 clinical trials that hopefully will be replacing them. So we basically will take the fecal part out and we'll just be using these pills to deliver a similar effect. And it gives a lot more control because part of the problem with fecal material transplant is you have to find a donor and you have to know a lot about that donor to know exactly what you're getting, right? Because some things are actually transferable. For instance, patients whose donors have had obesity many of them have developed obesity after having a fecal material transplant. So we don't want to have that type of side effects, and it's much easier to control when you have a pill versus trying to find donors.
Right. And do you recommend when you have to take a course of antibiotics that you up your probiotics?
It's a good question. There's a little bit of a mixed outlook on that. So if you take them at the first start of the antibiotic, that's what's been shown to be the most beneficial. And if you're already taking probiotics, you may not need more necessarily. You just keep taking what you're taking. But then you probably don't want to start it after the antibiotics. And that's some people do that. They take the antibiotics thinking, oh, there's no point in me starting it, and they'll do it afterwards. That has actually been shown to slow your recovery time. So if you are going to take probiotics, take them from the time you start the antibiotics on through.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And actually, I did see there was a question about kimchi. They know that it's a probiotic, but it can cause stomach cancer. Well, those are both technically true. The one caveat is that not all kimchi is a probiotic. Some of it is pasteurized. And also many of the strains that are found outside of yogurt haven't been studied to see if they are probiotics or not. So just because a food is fermented doesn't mean it's a probiotic because we haven't studied the bacteria that are in those foods. That almost all the research has been in yogurt. So if it's not yogurt, we don't really know much about those bugs, unfortunately. And in terms of stomach cancer, that link is there. It is just a correlation, an association. We don't know if it's causative. And in fact, there's a real question as to whether it is causative because there are a lot of different factors that can go into that are affecting it. For instance, people who tend to eat large amounts of kimchi have very different diets than people that don't eat large amount of kimchi. And it's difficult to make that comparison. And it may actually be related to other factors like H. pylori or other microbiome factors. So it's a little bit unclear, but really the moral of the story seems to be don't eat massive amounts of kimchi. And if you do eat kimchi, make sure you're eating it with other fibers to make sure you're getting that part as well.
Lee?
Yes.
I'll ask you a question. I have a chart from some years ago which gives foods, a list of foods that are alkaline and then foods that are more acid. I don't have anything that's current, and I'm wondering what you think of that way to approach certain foods.
I mean, there's some benefit to understanding the pH of foods, mostly for oral health, actually, right? So you don't want to have a bunch of acidic foods and then let that sit on your teeth. So general rule is good to rinse your mouth out with water after you eat, because then you kind of just take care of that problem, right? There's no residual sugars sitting in there. There's no residual acid. But I think the reason a lot of people talk about alkalizing versus acidifying foods is because of a misunderstanding that the body cannot control its pH. The body is very good at controlling its own pH. In fact, if it didn't, we wouldn't exist, right? Like we need that. And it's not so much about the acidity or the basic nature of the foods, but you just need to make sure you're getting enough plant foods. And that really kind of gives all the building blocks that you need. That's why I use the term eat the rainbow, because it is kind of that simple for health. As long as you are getting a diversity of plants and all these different colors, you are hitting all the different nutrients, all the different micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals. You're getting all these phytonutrients, and everything should be pretty well balanced because you're having that diversity. Now, if you were eating things only from the acidic side of that list, that's problematic, but it's pretty uncommon, right? People don't just eat acidic foods. They also eat alkalizing foods. And then drinking enough water is another really important thing, right? So staying hydrated also is important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Kombucha. So kombucha hasn't really been studied. There's almost no research on kombucha. And so any health benefits that you hear are purely anecdotal, meaning, it's what their grandmother told them about it, which there's some benefit to that. I'm not going to say that there's nothing positive about that. We just don't have the science behind it. And this goes to what I was saying earlier, that things outside of yogurt haven't really been studied. So the probiotic benefits of kimchi or kombucha are really not well studied. If there are any, which I would tend to think there's probably some probiotic benefit. We just don't understand it at this point. The one thing to be careful about with kombucha is it does contain sugar. So that is a sugar sweetened beverage. So you do have to keep that in mind in terms of not getting too much sugar in your diet. And in generally, sugar sweetened beverages are not something we really recommend, right? Water would be the best choice. But if you enjoy it and it's a treat and you're having probably a small amount, right? Most people don't eat large or drink large amounts of kombucha, then it's perfectly fine. I have to say, I have made my own kombucha before. So I'm not anti kombucha, and I actually found it quite enjoyable and fun. It's kind of like having a pet. You have to feed it. But yeah, there's no documented health benefits at this point.
But there have been studies of turmeric.
Correct. Yeah, turmeric, and particularly the component in turmeric, curcumin, has actually been very well studied, in part because it's been turned into a supplement, right? So now there's a way that they can make money from it. So they actually have isolated the curcumin portion, and you can buy a supplement of just curcumin. And that allowed them to make money. And that's unfortunately what typically drives research. Companies pay for research so they can make money from things. And that's why things like kombucha have not been very well studied, though there are now companies like Kavita out there that maybe they will be putting some research dollars into this, because that initial research is really difficult to get funding for. But once you have the early research results, then you can go to larger organizations like the National Institute of Health and ask for grant funding. So we could get there in the future. I think it will happen. We just need to get that initial data to show that there is something there, more than just people have drank this for thousands of years and have reported to have health benefits.
So, but isn't it better to get, if you're going to looking for curcumin, isn't it better to get it through foods or tea than a supplement?
I would generally say yes. And the reason for that is because of something called the food matrix effect or the entourage effect. So a food is in a matrix and it comes with all different compounds. And when they function together as an entourage, they are more powerful than they are separately. So they are not simply the sum of their parts. So by having it in a whole food, you get all the things in turmeric. There's a lot more to turmeric than curcumin. Right. So you're getting the curcumin, but you're also getting the other phytonutrients and fiber and things like that. So having it in a food form is always going to be more beneficial. And it's also typically safer because it's harder to consume large amounts that way. So you don't have the risk of toxicity that you might have from taking a supplement.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And I think turmeric's pretty delicious too, actually. I have some turmeric teas.
Yeah.
Janet had golden milk this morning. Yeah, making your own paste is definitely the way to go. You know what's in it. Doesn't necessarily have a lot of sugar, which sometimes people add because they think that turmeric needs it. I don't think it does personally. I don't think it's super spicy. You know, sometimes things that are really spicy need that, but I feel like it's less spicy than ginger is. Any other questions? Now is your time.
Lee, perhaps you should tell them about the Linus Pauling Institute.
Absolutely. That's a great one. Thank you, Janet. So yes, if you're looking for more nutrition information, other than the GW Integrative Medicine podcast, the Linus Pauling Institute Micronutrient Information Center, which we will send you a link to that, has fantastic information. And actually, we've collaborated with them on our podcast now. So you probably have heard about them if you've been listening to our podcast. But they have a freely available website that you can just go and like look up vitamin C or any mineral or even phytonutrients or fiber, and they have pages of information. But they have them all. They have a table of contents at the top, so you can actually click on them and go down to where you want to see it. Really easy to use and very up to date, all evidence based, and they all have the citations to the science too. So if you want to read the science, you can click on the citation and read it. So that's my best place to send you for just kind of general nutrition information. If you want to learn about any nutrient, that's the way to go. Another source of really good information is the Harvard Nutrition Source. And so that's where that healthy eating plate came from. So that was the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate, the one that had the different, I guess it's a plate and has the different triangles, basically showing you should eat mostly plants. They have lots of great information like that, sort of how-to information about nutrition. And their newsletter is really helpful because if there's anything that's coming out that's really timely, or if there's a fad out there right now, they will often address it. So they'll show you what the science is, or if we don't have any science behind it, tell you about that. So I really recommend those as your two best nutrition information sources. And they're all reliable and evidence-based, whereas unfortunately, a lot of the information out there about nutrition is really not. Often it's just someone's opinion and it's not based on any evidence at all, which is very frustrating for me. All right, so Victoria has a survey that she's going to share with you that will help us get information about how this event went, what you might want to see for future events, and she's going to put it in the chat. And we'll just ask for this last few minutes, if you just take a couple of minutes, it really shouldn't take very long, few questions, and then give us feedback about this event and just generally the Resiliency and Wellbeing Center, any thoughts you had about things that would be beneficial for you.